Are you part of the great resignation, that mass exodus of people who are leaving their jobs to start something new? Then something you need to consider is what to do with your company 401k. Rather than just rolling it over, consider opening a truly self-directed IRA. With a self-directed IRA, a truly self-directed IRA, your retirement portfolio can include real estate, precious metals, cryptocurrency, notes, loans, a new business, and traditional equities like stocks and bonds. You can make any investment the law allows with a truly self-directed retirement account. Listen, you probably have questions, so why not take the time to get the answers? Start with going to IRAadvantage.com. Then talk to the truly self-directed IRA professionals at IRA Advantage.
Would you like to learn more about truly self-directed IRAs? Then visit IRAadvantage.com, view our videos, and call IRA Advantage. Let us set up a truly self-directed IRA for you. That's IRAadvantage.com.
Do you have an opinion on anything you'd like to share with us?
Senator, as a sitting judge, it's inappropriate for me to comment on any personal views I might hold.
No, it's not.
Because
we
I would
just
not
established the first question I asked you was, your view of the world does matter. If you never thought about the world, if you never thought about these issues, you're not qualified to be a federal judge. And I think you ought to come here and answer. I think all of you should come here and answer them forthrightly.
That is Senator John Kennedy, not related to the Massachusetts Kennedys, and he's from the great state of Louisiana. And this is the Lars Larson Show. Glad to have you with me. I want to tell you about this because Joe Biden keeps putting people up for federal judge positions that are hugely significant to all of us. And why? Well, we see in the last few years, federal judges decide whether or not your employer has to force the jab on you. Federal judges decide whether or not your daughter or your granddaughter has to compete in sports against biological males. Federal judges decide whether or not your Second Amendment rights are going to be recognized or ignored and kicked to the curb. So it's important for people like Senator John Kennedy when these judge nominees from Joe Biden are sent up for confirmation. You can't even get on the federal bench without confirmation. Well, Joe Biden keeps putting people in front of these confirmation committees, some of whom sound like they never went to law school. Some of them sound like they never finished high school. I mean, they are just almost uniformly dangerous. In fact, Republican Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri says he won't vote for one of President Joe Biden's judicial nominees because she actually made the argument that religious Americans were more likely to spread COVID-19, meaning that Christians somehow were more toxic or more infectious, which is absolute craziness. But that's what some of Joe Biden's nominees actually believe. In any case, welcome to the Lars Larson Show. Glad to have you on board. I'll get to your calls here in just a moment at 866-HEY-LARS. And if you're a naysayer, I'll put you right to the head of the line at 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. Lauren Ali Khan is one of those nominees. It's a young lady, Lauren Ali Khan. And Kennedy was asking Lauren Ali Khan about her personal beliefs. Take a listen to this exchange.
Do you believe that minorities in America need special help to succeed? It's a very simple question.
Senator, to the extent policymakers have enacted laws that provide protections,
do you agree with those policymakers?
I am not a policymaker, and as a sitting judge, it is...
You don't have an opinion, or you're just not going to answer? I don't want to waste more time if you're not going to answer.
Senator, as a sitting judge, it is inappropriate for me to comment on my personal views.
No, it's not. We've already established that you're not going to let your personal beliefs interfere with your decisions, so I think you ought to tell us what your personal beliefs are.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice if you actually were able to ask a judge, what are your personal beliefs? Do you believe that Christians spread COVID-19 more than non-Christians? Things like that. And this Lauren Ali Khan, Joe Biden's nominee, I'd remind you, Joe Biden puts up the likes of Ketanji Brown Jackson, who now sits on the U.S. Supreme Court. When she was asked, what is a woman? And she is a woman. At least by all accounts, she's a woman. She said she's not a biologist, so she could not tell the U.S. Senate committee what a woman is. This is the kind of nonsense that you get from Joe Biden and judicial nominees. And when Josh Hawley from Missouri was asking this young lady, Lauren Ali Khan, about her beliefs, Ali Khan was asked if she believes it's wrong to discriminate against religious communities, and he questioned her previous comments about the COVID-19 pandemic. Here's what Josh Hawley, U.S. Senator, said. Do you think it's wrong to discriminate on the basis of faith? Absolutely. Then why did you argue that religious services and religious people pose a greater risk of infection than people gathering to argue for the defunding of police? Now, that's a question a lot of us have asked. In any case, Joe Biden just keeps hitting them out of the park, sending up those nominees. Some of them, when they're questioned by the likes of John Kennedy, the man you heard earlier, they literally don't know the law. I mean, because John Kennedy does, and he'll ask him, do you know what, Madison versus Marbury is? No. Have you ever filed a motion in court? No. Have you ever practiced before this kind of court or that kind of court? No. It's like Joe Biden has picked some of the most biggest numbskulls to be federal judges because he knows they have the right politics. And that's what it comes down to. Not whether or not they're capable of doing the job, but do they check the right boxes? To your calls now at 866 Hey Lars. Let's start with Mike. Hey, Mike, welcome to the Lars Larson Show. What's on your mind?
Oh, thank you, Lars. I'd just like to propose to insurance companies and any other healthcare providers that the gender changes that these people are getting by state funds and insurance companies, I think that should be considered cosmetic surgery.
I do too.
I don't know too many insurance companies that cover cosmetic surgery. It's these gender changes they're not medically necessary. And if they want to go to that suicide thing, well, that's a completely different treatment and should be treated accordingly. I mean, if a veteran is suicidal, he or she gets treated accordingly.
Right. So they get counseling. They may get some pharmaceutical help if that's appropriate, but they get treated for the problems they're having between their ears, not the problems they're having between their thighs.
Yeah, because, I mean, like you say, it's not medically necessary to have these gender changes done. It's cosmetic surgery to me.
I agree with you, and the only time that cosmetic surgery is typically covered is if you've suffered some kind of injury, like you're in a car accident and you've got scars or you've got some part of your limbs that don't work. They will go in and do what surgery they can, not just to fix the physical problem, but also to fix the looks.
Normal people, physically anyway, mentally they're kind of messed up. But the other thing that I'd like to propose, which is really out there, why don't we consider people that have changed gender a new sex? They're not really male and they're not really female. They've assigned themselves something new. So if we put them in a third category, then you'd be able to separate them from, say, women's sports or men's sports or solidly gender-affirmed people that are comfortable with who they are. It would save them from having to compete with somebody that's
I think, while I think that's sensible, Mike, I think what the left will say is that's like saying separate but equal. And they're going to go back to Brown versus the Board of Education and say you can't take black kids and put them in a different school and say you have to be educated separately. They're going to bring that up. And when Obama first came out with the bathroom rules,
born black. Hispanic is born Hispanic.
I understand that, but if you listen, I'm not saying their argument is right. I'm just saying I understand it, and I understand what the political response will be. The Congress will not pass a law that puts transgender into an entirely different category, but what they should do, and you're right about this, they should treat it as a mental illness. And frankly, on the suicide issue, do you know that the rate of suicide among post-surgery transgenders is actually as high, may even be higher than the rate of suicide among those who are not given the surgery? That should tell you all you need to know. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Do you have investment properties you're considering selling and would like to learn how to defer the tax consequences? Then you need to call Equity Advantage and learn about a 1031 exchange. A 1031 exchange is a powerful investment tool. It enables you to keep a property's equity intact when it's used to acquire like-kind replacement property of equal or greater value and equity, even if you recently acquired the property. For over 30 years, Equity Advantage has been providing investors solutions for deferring taxes and maximizing the value of investments through a 1031 exchange. At Equity Advantage, we don't sell investments, but rather provide the tax deferment tools and expertise to facilitate their sale and transfer. Learn more by going to 1031exchange.com. or Google YouTube Equity Advantage for in-depth videos. Listen, you've worked hard for the money in your investments. Equity Advantage works hard to keep it yours.
Learn more about 1031 exchanges and Equity Advantage at 1031exchange.com. That's 1031exchange.com.
Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show, and it's a pleasure to be with you. I want to talk to our friend Jonathan Cho, who is a journalist with the Discovery Institute, about something I talked about yesterday, but Jay Cho is a whole lot closer to what's going on in Seattle because he covers Seattle specifically. Jonathan, welcome back to the program. And why did the city council make the decision it made yesterday to say we have a brand new drug law for the entire state of Washington passed by the people's representatives, but we're not going to enforce it in the state's biggest city?
Well, Lars, it was an absolutely stunning turn of events. Look, as you know, the council is divided on this. You have the far left progressive socialist wing that was going to vote against this bill. But then there were the other more moderates. And one of the council members, Councilmember Andrew Lewis, he was expected to vote in favor of passing this common sense bill. But at the very last minute, after all these far left activists pressured him at this council meeting, which I was at, he flip-flopped and voted against it. And now there is tremendous political fallout happening for this guy.
Well, I hope so, because I hope he gets an earful. I hope his constituents hold his feet to the fire. But here's the thing. When you elect somebody to a state legislature, to the Congress, or the city council, or the county commission, they're expected to represent their constituents, which I would guess Lewis is. Are they elected at large, or are they elected by districts? Do you happen to remember, Jonathan?
There are two at large. Lewis is elected by district, and he represents one of the most important ones, and that's the downtown core. And I'm going to tell you right now, my phone, my direct messages, my texts, going off the hook right now after Lewis's vote from business owners. The business coalitions absolutely irate, calling him an empty suit and someone who betrayed him. He was supposed to be there for the business interests. The businesses wanted this bill to pass because, again, this law, this ordinance, let me remind you, Lars, it's in alignment with the state law that already passed by a Democratic legislature in a special session. So the council not doing this is stunning.
So beyond even the problem that the drug law is not going to be, they're not going to have this local version of the state law, you got the question whether or not Lewis cares more about a few activists and probably not even that many. I mean, do you think there are even a couple of dozen people? So instead of listening to tens or hundreds of thousands of your own constituents in your district and the business owners and the people who live in the downtown area who have to suffer into this, instead of listening to them, you listen to a couple of dozen activists instead? That's who you actually represent?
Lars, I'm going to tell you right now, on Tuesday afternoon when I was in that council meeting, that room, the online Zoom public commentary and testimony, it was overwhelmingly the vocal minority. But that's the key at the end of the day. The far left activists know how to mobilize. The moderates, the reasonable people of Seattle, they're working at 2 p.m. when public testimony is open, so they couldn't be there. They sent representatives. Business Coalition sent 1 or 2 representatives, and that wasn't enough. Here's the bottom line. People need to mobilize, get boots on the ground and into these council meetings, because clearly council members like Andrew Lewis are vulnerable, and they can be swayed either way.
You know what worries me, Jonathan? This country is special because we don't do law by the rule of the mob. We don't lynch people because of the rule of the mob. We don't throw people in jail because the mob outside is screaming loud enough for it. We say we've got a system of laws, we've got a system, a process, we've got cities and counties and legislatures. We pass things in the cool light of day. We say we're going to make a carefully considered decision on things. And then we find out we're being ruled by the mob anyway because the boneless, spineless people on these ruling councils have said, oh, I'm going to listen to the mob. I'm not going to listen to the people I actually represent. This is rule of the mob, the same way as it was 3 years ago when the mob was saying defund the police, and they numbered maybe a few thousand in Seattle and a few thousand in Portland, and they got what they wanted. and the hundreds of thousands of people who live in both cities got a defunded police force and the predictable results.
Let me just say for the record, the 5 council members who voted against this common sense bill, Andrew Lewis, Shama Sawant, Lisa Herbold, Tammy Morales, and Teresa Mosqueda. Again, these are the folks, at least the 4 prior to Lewis, they lean left. They're socialists. They're self-proclaimed communists in many cases. But Lewis, that was, again, the flip-flopping vote that everyone was, again, caught off guard with. And he's now dealing with folks now who are pulling their endorsements of Lewis. Just this morning, the president of the Downtown Seattle Association, John Scholes, his name is no longer on Andrew Lewis's endorsement list. And that's a huge hit, and more are expected to follow.
I'm talking to Jonathan Cho. He's a journalist with the Discovery Institute. You see his journalism everywhere, and we're always glad for his insights on this. But I wondered about that. You know, when I saw the comments of one of the lefties that voted for this, not Sawant, maybe it was Mosqueda, who said, "Well, you don't understand. You're going to take these people, away from their tent." And I said, "Hold on a second. She thinks the most compassionate thing to do is to leave a drug addict in a tent by the freeway, instead of putting them, even if they go to jail, because that seemed to be her big concern, why they might go to jail for a day or two or a week, that in jail they are under guard, they are under the watchful eye of medical people, they're getting 3 hots and a warm, dry place to sleep, or cool in the case of this weather, and she thinks it's better to leave the drug addict by the side of the freeway where they can either hurt other people to fulfill their habit or get hurt by other people trying to fulfill their habit. We've had murders, we've had assaults, we've had rapes, we've had abuse, we've had assault. I mean, all this stuff going on, and she thinks that the addicts are better off in a tent than they would be in custody and maybe pushed into treatment?
Lars, once again, you're spot on, and this is my point that I made earlier. We are in an info war. The problem is your narrative, the common sense narrative, the truth, the reality on the ground that I'm reporting every single day, that's not coming out. The agenda of the far left continues to influence and dominate city and county government in this region, and that's what's so stunning.
You got to keep an eye on the journalism of Jonathan Cho. He's a journalist with the Discovery Institute. And Jonathan, we always appreciate your time. Thank you very much for breaking away from everything else you're doing to do this for us. Thank you.
Always available for you, Lars. Take care.
Thank you very much. That is Jonathan Cho. To your calls now. Let's go first to Luke. Hey, Luke, welcome to the Lars Larson Show on Conspiracy Theory Thursday. What's on your mind?
Hey, no conspiracy theory here. Concerned parent. I have 4 and 6-year-olds. All of the gender ideology has completely taken over the zeitgeist. I just did a little calling around, and every single, I got a hold of outside in. But the first 6 numbers I called of people providing gender-affirming care, nobody answers.
Nobody answers. So are we talking pronouns, or are we talking what they call gender-affirming care, which is mutilation of children?
We're talking about Lupron. We're talking about puberty blockers that obviously don't. It's not reversible. No, it's top 6 numbers off of Google. Nobody answers.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, Luke, we have called OHSU, which bar none is one of the largest gender, mutilation clinics in America. They're named as one of the top 5 or 6. And you call them and say, will you come on and explain to us the science behind chemical castration of teenage boys or double mastectomies and puberty blockers for teenage girls? And they will not do it. OHSU will not do it because they know they're making a pile of money, and they don't want to talk about it because they know that they don't have answers to the questions about whether or not this is mutilation of children. Shame on OHSU. If you're buying that name brand CBD right now, write down this website, GenericCBD.com. It's Lars. That's GenericCBD.com. Make the switch to generic CBD and save today. Big time. Up to 75%. Their products are fantastic. They sell a muscle and joint cream that's out of this world. My wife and I love generic CBD. It retails for $100. On sale right now, $39.95. But you can try it for free. Just pay $2.95 for shipping. This penetrating cream melts right into your muscles and joints, your knees, your elbows, and your lower back. You won't believe how fast it goes to work. Plus, it's one of the best moisturizers you've ever tried. Try it for yourself. Get your free sample at GenericCBD.com. That's right. Get it on Get that sample on the way right now. See what this generic CBD cream can do for you. Get your free sample at genericcbd.com. That's genericcbd.com. These products and statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease or illness. Back in a moment. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you. And I have to confess to you that when the word gerrymandering comes into the conversation, I understand a very, very small amount of it. So I like to call on somebody who knows a whole lot more about it than I do to try to explain what the U.S. Supreme Court did today in its decision involving Alabama, where, if I read this right, the Supreme Court said when you drew that map of Alabama to redraw all the congressional districts based on the most recent census, which is now 3 years ago, you didn't do it in a way that took account of race as much as you should have. Whereas there are people like me who somehow, I know it's an old-fashioned point of view, think that we ought to be colorblind. But no, apparently the Supreme Court says, no, you should have been paying more attention to the color of voters in Alabama. Michael Domino is a professor of law at Widener University Commonwealth Law School. Michael, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Can you help me understand why the U.S. Supreme Court says you should have taken note of color, the color of voters, more when they drew these boundaries in Alabama?
Yeah, well, I can take a shot at it. It's the short answer is that according to the court, that's what the statute says. So this is not the Supreme Court saying interpreting the Constitution directly. That's not the most significant part of the case. It's an interpretation of the Voting Rights Act. And in 1982, Congress amended the Voting Rights Act and added a provision that said that it would be illegal to adopt a voting procedure, including districting, that would have the effect of preventing someone from having an equal opportunity to elect candidates of his choice because of his race. And how that's been interpreted by the court since then is that if a state districts in such a way that a minority group doesn't have a fair shot at electing its representatives, then that violates the Voting Rights Act. And that was what was involved in this case.
I mean, because what they overall said to Alabama was, okay, you created a bunch of districts. One of them was majority black voters. A majority of the voters in that district, that newly created district, were African Americans, but you should have created two with a majority of African Americans. Do I understand that part of it right?
That's exactly correct, yes. And what the court said was there are pockets of black voters in Alabama such that you could draw a second district of majority black voters. And if you did, that 2 representatives out of 7 would do a better job of matching black population in Alabama than the current 1 out of 7 split that they had.
Now, Michael, I'm kind of a simple-minded guy, but should I assume that somebody who's white, I'm a white guy, better represents my point of view than somebody who's black? Because frankly, when I look at the current crowd back there, I don't think I have anything in common with Lindsey Graham, and I think I have a lot in common with Tim Scott. And you say, but no, Lars, if you're a voter, you want to vote for people of your same skin color. Isn't this all predicated on sort of a racist assumption that black Americans are best represented by blacks and white Americans by whites and Asian, et cetera, et cetera? Because that seems to be a bigoted standard to begin with, doesn't it?
Well, it does. And the court has tried to get us, or at least has said, that we shouldn't think in those terms. But there is an important difference between the question you just asked and what the court was deciding in this case. The key with the Voting Rights Act is that it's not focused on the race of the candidate or the race of the representative. It's the race of the voters. So the goal of the Voting Rights Act is not to choose a certain number of black representatives. It's to ensure that black voters have control over a certain number of seats. And if they end up deciding to elect a white representative, well, then that's their business. It's irrelevant to the statute. The question is on the voters who get to have control over the district, not on the race of the representatives that they end up choosing.
I'm talking to Michael Domino, who's a professor of law at Widener University Commonwealth Law School, but I'm still confused by this. Doesn't the voter who votes in a majority black district or a non-majority black district, that voter still gets to vote, and they get to pick the candidates that are available in that district? Then why does it matter whether the district is majority black or minority black?
Well, it wouldn't if blacks and whites had the same preferences, which is why the court has said that we're going to create these majority-minority districts only when there's what we call racially polarized voting. That is, only when blacks vote for one candidate and whites vote for another candidate. If that's what happens, and we draw districts that don't give blacks control over any districts, then what we have is we have a large black population in a state like Alabama, but we don't have their ability to choose the representatives that they want because they're always outvoted. They're subsumed in a larger group of whites who vote against them. So it doesn't
Michael,
have to be that way, but it tends to be that way.
Would you bet that if I checked Alabama's vote in the two elections that Barack Obama ran in, that a majority of the votes Barack Obama got from Alabama came from white voters? Because black voters are only 25% of the population. I would guess, Obama got a bunch of white votes, and he got them from, voters that did not share his skin color. So doesn't that kind of prove that the whole notion that you're not going to get your choice of candidates? Sure you do. And there are an awful lot of white voters who vote for black candidates, right?
Well, it does happen in some elections, to be sure. But in this particular case, there was proof below, and the lower court found that there was racially polarized voting. In fact, to a fairly significant extent, that whites and blacks did prefer different candidates by and large by quite a large margin.
Well, that almost sounds more disturbing. Michael, if you tell me, well, when blacks vote, they tend to vote for the black candidate, I say, well, that sounds like bigoted voting to me. I don't choose candidates I'm going to vote for based on their skin color. There have been a number of black candidates for president. They didn't make it through the primaries, but I would have voted for them if they'd been the nominee. And they were conservative enough. I'd vote for. I'm going to vote for Donald Trump, not because he's white, but because I think he's great. I would. But if Donald Trump wasn't available and Tim Scott was my choice, I'd be voting for Tim Scott.
It doesn't have to be the choice of a candidate based on race. It could just be that the blacks in this district prefer a Democrat, and whites tend to prefer a Republican. That's enough of a difference. It doesn't have to be I'm choosing this candidate because of race. All that we're talking about is that blacks and whites tend to choose different candidates, and of course, given it just happens to be that blacks tend to be much more reliable Democrats than whites are.
Sadly, even though I don't think the Democrats do a very good job on behalf of them, and Obama's a great example of that. Michael, thanks for the time. I appreciate the insights because, as I said, gerrymandering makes my head hurt. So thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'll come back anytime.
I'm glad to have you. That's Michael Domino. He's a professor of law at Widener University Commonwealth Law School. Glad you're listening on the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to take your phone calls and emails. And as you know, we put naysayers right to the head of the line at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. You can send emails to talk@larslarson.com. Doesn't get much easier than that. And you can vote in our Twitter poll. You'll find it two places, at Lars Larson Show on Twitter and larslarson.com on the web. You're listening to the Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you. Would you believe this, that an awful lot of social media that constantly uses the excuse that what they're doing is trying to control things like child sex trafficking and pornography, and especially child pornography, all of which they should be doing. They use that as an excuse for all the censorship they've been imposing elsewhere. And yet, It turns out that some of what meta platforms, which we used to know as Facebook, and other players like Instagram, have algorithms built into their networks that actually enable the child sex traffickers, enable the underage sex content. I'll cite the Wall Street Journal. Instagram, the popular social media site owned by Meta Platforms, helps connect and promote a vast network of accounts openly devoted to the commission and purchase of underage sex content, according to investigations by the Wall Street Journal and researchers at Stanford University and the University of Massachusetts. Pedophiles have long used the internet, but unlike the forums and the file transfer services that cater to people who have interest in illicit content, Instagram doesn't just host these activities, its algorithms, those are mathematical formula and other web coding, is used to promote that kind of activity. Instagram connects pedophiles and guides them to content sellers via recommendation systems that excel at linking those who share those kinds of interests. The researchers found that Instagram enabled people to search explicit hashtags like pedo whore, PEDOWHORE, and preteen sex, and then connects them to accounts that use those terms to advertise child sex material for sale. Such accounts often claim to be run by the children themselves, and they use overtly sexual handles incorporating words like, and I don't even want to say that one on the air, but what they've found, this is what the researchers found at Stanford, Instagram accounts offering to sell illicit sexual material generally don't publish it openly, instead posting menus of content. Certain accounts invite buyers to commission specific acts, some menus including prices for videos of children harming themselves and imagery of minors performing sexual acts with animals. Now, you would think that if Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and the rest, if they could do as much political content monitoring as they've done over the last couple of election cycles, the very least they could do is go after this child sex garbage and shut it down. They say they're capable of doing it. They should do it. They claim they're doing it. They're not doing it, is what it sounds like. Let's go to Jason. Hey, Jason, welcome to the Lars Larson Show. What's on your mind today?
Oh, yeah, take my call after all that. Thanks a lot, Lars.
Well, it does kind of relate, doesn't it?
Yeah, I guess it does. It lumps in there. I've got a conspiracy theory.
Okay.
I can drive a wedge into this somehow. About these perverted teachers, we've got to do something. This is really getting out of hand. I mean, even though circumcision is in the Bible, it's been going on for thousands of years.
Yep.
You know, there's millions of girls out there in the world right now that have had gender mutilation. I'm not too sure what's going on with all that. You might get a woman's opinion.
We've
more
Jason,
opinion on your show.
We've had women on to talk about that, including a young lady that I happened to meet when we were at Stanford at the Hoover Institution. We go down there about once a year, and she told me that is one of her special issues that she tracks. And I said, what brought you to that? And she said, it was done to me. This is an adult woman who's well-educated. She's an activist on this subject because it was done to her. And you understand there's a world of difference between circumcision done to males and the kind of mutilation they do to little girls, which is specific, and it's culturally based, somewhat religiously based, by various cultures that say we want to make sure women get no pleasure out of sex and that, in fact, sex can be painful for them. And that's not the case for males who are circumcised. So I'm with you all the way, but you know what is tough to do, Jason? We call medical professionals who work in that field, and they say, we don't want to come on the air and talk about it. And I say, why not? And they said, because we draw too much negative attention. And in fact, there was a federal act that made it illegal for doctors to do this to girls in the United States because they're aware that there were people coming in from other parts of the world as immigrants who would bring this horror show with them. And then ask doctors to do it here, sometimes foreign-born doctors who come here and they want to continue doing here what they did there, and they have to be told, no, you can't do it. And most states right now do not have a law that makes it illegal for a doctor to mutilate a little girl like that. And I find that shocking. I would think it'd be the easiest law in the world that you could show up at the state legislature and say, hey, anybody in favor of mutilating little girls done by OBGYNs? You'd get, every hand in the room would say, no, we're not. And then you'd pass a law and it'd be done. But strangely enough, they shot down the federal law in the courts. They said you can't do this from the federal level, but the states can do it. I would think that every one of the 50 states would have it. Last time I checked, most of the states do not have a law that forbids doctors from doing this to little girls, which is kind of a stunner, but hey, it's a strange world these days.
Yeah, it's really sad. We need to get to the root of the problem. The American people need to fight back, and like they were taking over that protest the other night where fists started flying. We need to see more of that.
In Glendale, California? Well,
yeah,
I'm not in favor of changing public policy by brawls outside of a school board meeting, but I'm with you in terms of shutting down these other practices. Mutilation of little girls ought to be illegal, and the person who does it, doctor or not, should go to prison for a long time. Let's go to Scott. Hey, Scott, welcome to the Lars Larson Show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Lars. First-time caller, long-time listener.
Thank you.
I like something. My conspiracy theory sort of ties in with the last caller as to why the left is pushing this transgender. The next Democrat.
I don't think so.
When
okay.
The proverbial.
That's your conspiracy theory
right.
for today? Can I tell you, it sounds like your phone is breaking up, but Scott, I don't think she has any interest in the job. I think she likes just being rich. Are you a small business owner who could use a few $100,000? Well, all of us could. Employee retention tax credits are an incredible opportunity for you. Call the experts at Get My Funds. They've been around since the beginning of the pandemic, and they've already helped out 1,500 small business owners. And what do they get? $300 million in funding, and they know what they're doing at Get My Funds. They have a team of CPAs who specialize in filing for these credits, and they're with you every step of the way, even if there's an audit. They stand behind their work with an audit safeguard. If you retain 5 or more W-2 employees during COVID, even if you already got the PPP, you need to call Get My Funds now at 800-535-2950. It's not a grant, it's not a loan, it's a tax refund. And there are no upfront fees to find out if you qualify. Go with a team you can trust at Get My Funds, 800-535-2950, or getmyfunds.com. That's getmyfunds.com. One more time, getmyfunds.com. And you're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. One of the things I hate the most is when news organizations decide to either invent staging, and that's where you go out to a story and you decide to stage a photograph or stage something else, or you make up quotes, or you literally make up the story you're going to tell to your audience when you say that you're reporting news. Now, one of the things we brought up right after Ukraine was invaded by Russia is Ukraine has a really sketchy history when it comes to Nazis, because Ukraine has always been a country kind of caught in the middle between Western Europe and Russia. And during World War II, they originally sided against the Nazis, and then they decided to pick a side and said, our side is going to be the Nazi side. So there were an awful lot of people in Ukraine's government back then at the time of World War II who were full-blown Nazis. Okay, now we know that as a piece of history. Is that still relevant today? Apparently it is. And I brought up the fact that a number of reporters had covered the fact that some of the units within the Ukrainian military, where you have people cheering on Ukraine saying, Ukraine's got to win, Russia's got to lose. And when those of us like me brought up the fact that very good reporters had cited the fact that a number of the battalions that were right on the front lines in the eastern parts of Ukraine that were the first places invaded by Russia were Nazis. The Azov battalion, for example. And in fact, in about 2016, there was a bill that was passed by the U.S. Congress saying we're going to help out foreign military units, but we're not putting any money into the Azov battalion. And why is that? Because they're a bunch of Nazis. So then you see this, and I'll cite my source on this one. We still haven't managed to pry loose enough time to talk to Matt Taibbi. But Matt Taibbi, who is a bit of a left-winger, he's kind of a progressive, but he seems like a really solid journalist. He's one of those people I admire the most. like Jonathan Turley and others, who, even though their personal politics are very left and very progressive, they're willing to be a really good lawyer or a really good journalist and just tell the darn story. Well, here's what's happened. Taibbi points out that the New York Times released in its own pages a small, as he describes it, a small but disgusting detail about the New York Times reporting in Ukraine. Now, I've told you before a little bit of the inside baseball about how journalism works in America. Here's what happens. The biggest newspapers in America, or the things that used to be called newspapers, now it's mostly online, would do stories. And that story, or those stories, were then picked up by both the Associated Press and UPI, United Press International. UPI, for the most part, doesn't exist anymore. It's technically still alive, but it's really not there. The AP is a cooperative of news organizations, meaning it's not a private company. There are newspapers and TV networks that are private companies. The AP is what they call a co-op, a cooperative, where all the members, TV stations, radio stations, online news outlets, and the rest, all put money in. But it's not a private company. It is owned by the people who use it. So how does the news get to you? For the most part, stories, especially national stories, are covered by outfits like the LA Times, the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos' newspaper, the New York Times, and other major papers. The AP then picks up their stories, and whatever spin was put on the story at the beginning, and there are very few stories that don't have a certain amount of spin to them, then goes out to every radio station in America, every TV outfit in America, whether it's on cable or broadcast. It goes out to all the different news. And if you wonder, why is it that so many of these stories seem so very similar? It's because of that arrangement. The stories start at the big operations. They go on to the wire service. They then go from the wire service to every other place. And once there's a spin on a story, I've been in newsrooms before where I came back and had told the boss, this is the story. And he says, I read the Associated Press version. It doesn't sound at all like what you're reporting. I'd say, trust me, boss, my story is solid. They're off base. And that happens more often than you'd think. Consider what Taibbi points out. The New York Times just released a story that in its headline says, Nazi symbols on Ukraine's front lines highlight thorny issues of history, and about whether or not it means anything that some Ukrainian soldiers have been photographed wearing Nazi, it's called the Totenkopf. It means the Nazi death head symbol. And one passage from the story cited by Taibbi, he says stands out. In November, during a meeting with New York Times reporters near the front lines, a Ukrainian press officer, so he's a guy who works with the military on behalf of the Ukrainian government, he himself wore a Totenkopf, a Nazi death head symbol that was made by a company called R3ICH. It looks like Reich. And he said he did not believe the patch was affiliated with the Nazis. A second press officer said journalists had asked soldiers to remove the patch before photographs were taken. Now, that's when my back went up. Because whether you know this or not, some of us in the journalism trade, both now as an opinion journalist and then as a reporter, felt very strongly about not presenting people with things that were fake. So we would sometimes show up at a story, and the police would say, well, you know, when the guy got here, he dropped his gun over here and the knife over there. Well, they'd already taken the gun and knife into evidence, and sometimes, not often, they'd say, hey, do you want us to put the gun back on the ground and the knife back on the ground so you can take pictures, video or still pictures? And we'd say, nope, we don't fake anything, period. Now, no matter how you feel about the press, when one of the biggest news organizations in America is admitting that it took photographs in which the journalists asked the soldiers to take the patch off before they took photos. And he says the institutional obstacles to getting clear information about the war in Ukraine are formidable, from embedding rules that bar journalists from entering so-called red zones and requiring escorts in yellow zones to casualties undercounted by officials on both sides to the open use of planted stories to harassment of any reporters who go against the official message. Journalists asking soldiers to remove Nazi patches is a new level of insanity. with the line between propagandist and reporter all but dissolved, how long before the embeds are offered NATO uniforms? Who thinks this is a good idea? And let me give you an example that I think really brings the point. Let's say, I don't think it's true in Joe Biden's military, but let's say there was a unit in the American military, and let's say members of that unit were allowed, I don't think they would be, but were allowed to wear Confederate flag patches on their uniforms. And you say it really doesn't mean what you're associating with, but let's take the patch off while the reporters take the pictures, and then you can put the patch back on. That's the closest comparison I could think of where you might see actual manipulation, because the New York Times knows that if they put a picture of a Ukrainian frontline outfit that is there wearing Nazi symbols and talking in terms of Nazi language and Nazi ideas, that's not going to go over well back at home. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. So we give our money to China and they get the tech for free. At least that's the way it looks like to me, except literally Americans may be shocked that while President Joe Biden will talk about all the things that Russia's doing and all the sanctions that he's going to have against Russia, and then you find out that we have a whole bunch of money, American taxpayer money, that's going both to Russia and to China. And the man who dug all that out is Adam Andrzejewski, who's CEO and founder of Open the Books, the fired former columnist at Forbes magazine. Adam, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Lars, great to be here.
So you dug all this out, and this is not a small amount of money that we're sending to both communist China and to Russia, correct?
Yeah, we shouldn't be borrowing money from China to pay China. That doesn't make any sense. So it was U.S. Senator Joni Ernst, her team, and our team of auditors at OpenTheBooks.com, and we found $1.3 billion of U.S. taxpayer money flowed to China and Russia over the course of the past 5 years. And here's why it's important, Lars. The Government Accountability Office, they were first tasked by Congress to get the amount of U.S. taxpayer money flowing into China over the past 5 years, and they found 48 million. We found 10 times as much. So it's amazing how fast the U.S. federal government loses track of taxpayer dollars.
Why? Okay, now people are going to want to know, well, what is this money being spent on? And isn't that where the story gets a whole lot worse?
It does get worse at every turn. So let's take some examples from China. In the American School Lunch Program, this program was created to use domestic agricultural production and put it into healthy lunches for children at the poverty line or 130% below the poverty line. Domestic agriculture, and $1.6 million actually went to China for their ag exporters. And so that's got people really fired up. You've got...
Stop for a second, Adam. I hate to interrupt. So am I to understand that American taxpayers send their money to D.C., they then send a relatively small amount, but $1.6 million that we give to China to make the people who grow food in China better able to sell it to other people in the world, including the United States? We're paying to help market their farm goods against our farm goods?
Right into our National School Lunch Program, yes. And and it's a sub-grant, so it was hidden. So the USDA didn't even know that U.S. taxpayer money from the United States Department of Agriculture through the Children's Nutrition Program was flowing on subgrants into China. They reached out. It was news to them. It's a subgrant from the state of California, the Department of Education. So now we have Freedom of Information sunshine requests into them to get the subcontract details on why U.S. taxpayer money is flowing through the state of California to Chinese ag exporters competing against our, on money earmarked for our domestic agricultural farm community.
Well, it sounds like, and there's no indication that the people in California didn't know exactly where the money was going. They knew where it was going. Am I right?
Well, in California state government, you would think so, right? So we're going to get to the bottom of it. This story's not over. What we have found is that the federal government, they sometimes track the first tier of subgrants. they never track, Lars, the second tier and the third tier. So U.S. Senator Joni Ernst now has legislation to change that, especially into the adversarial nations, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, to track second and third tier subgrants.
Well, and by the way, the fact that the people within the system know that the second, third, and fourth tiers are not being tracked means that seems like an open invitation to say, bring the money into our program, we'll throw it into another sub-program, then they'll send it somewhere that never would have been approved by the U.S. Congress. Am I right?
Yes, and here's the standard on every single dime of taxpayer money. The standard should be every dime online in real time. The technology exists. It just takes the political will, and U.S. Senator Joni Ernst's bill would go a long way to create that. And here's exactly why it's necessary. There isn't one single entity in all of world history, probably, that's gotten more scrutiny, especially over the course of the last 3 years, than the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Yep.
Yet we found additional money never disclosed on these second and third tier grants going into the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China. And it goes right, some of these things go, are material because of the lab leak theory. For example, we've got sub-awards from Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, a U.S. government agency, through NIH on a grant to electroshock mice in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. We've got 1.1 million on a sub-agreement through EcoHealth Alliance, of all people, through the U.S. Foreign Aid Agency, USAID, for coronavirus experiments. Here's what this is for. It was to identify known and unknown coronaviruses in wildlife that could make the leap to humans. Exactly material to the conversation on U.S. funding and whether or not there's a lab leak at Wuhan. This stuff needs transparency.
Well, and by the way, Adam, I know you're, depending on how your organization is funded, you may want to stay away from blatant politics. But over 2 years ago, we started looking into, as much as we could, Hunter Biden's ties to EcoHealth Alliance, because he would put money into a pandemic firm that then had deals with EcoHealth Alliance. So you understand how this happens is if the U.S. government is giving money that gets channeled to EcoHealth Alliance, how do they keep that money flow going? Well, it helps to have friends in high places, right? So all of a sudden, if you find out that your EcoHealth Alliance is doing deals with other groups that Hunter Biden's invested in, and he's got a friend who's vice president at the time, all of a sudden it's not hard to, you don't need a crayon and construction paper to connect those dots.
Well, that's very interesting, Lars. Here's, some additional context to all of that. So in a committee hearing in Congress, in the U.S. Senate in May of 2021, Dr. Anthony Fauci told the senators, in responding to questions about research at the Wuhan Institute, he said, quote, Chinese grantees awarded are very competent and trustworthy scientists. Now, okay, so here's the chaser. We identified NIH spent $300,000 in 2021 at the height of the pandemic on ethics training for Chinese scientists. And the reason that we found in the paperwork was that China was found woefully short on safety, integrity, and honest reporting. The key problems included, quote unquote, research misconduct, inadequate ethical review, neglect for human subjects and protections, and publication fraud.
All of that, and by the way, 2 years before the pandemic started, I remember during the pandemic, fairly early on, we found out that the U.S. State Department, with its consulate, with our embassy in China, was sending reports saying, hey, by the way, these labs are really sloppy. And that report went back to the State Department 2 years before the pandemic. We're told, hey, these folks run a sloppy operation, and it's a biosafety level 4 lab. It's not the place you can afford to be sloppy. And then you find out they've got ethical problems. Why? Because I'll bet their Chinese communist masters in Beijing say, we want results, produce results. Adam, it is always a pleasure. You always open people's eyes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lars.
If you're buying that name brand CBD right now, write down this website, genericcbd.com. It's Lars. That's genericcbd.com. Make the switch to generic CBD and save today. Big time, up to 75%. Their products are fantastic. They sell a muscle and joint cream that's out of this world. My wife and I love generic CBD. It retails for $100. On sale right now, $39.95. But you can try it for free. Just pay $2.95 for shipping. This penetrating cream melts right into your muscles and joints, your knees, your elbows, and your lower back. You won't believe how fast it goes to work. Plus, it's one of the best moisturizers you've ever tried. Try it for yourself. Get your free sample at genericcbd.com. That's right. Get that sample on the way right now. See what this generic CBD cream can do for you. Get your free sample at genericcbd.com. That's genericcbd.com. These products and statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease or illness. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. And if you decide you want to set me straight, why, naysayers go to the head of the line at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. I got to tell you my bias, my dog in the fight in this one. I own guns, have for most of my life, and I believe in the Second Amendment. I also serve unpaid on the board of directors of the Crime Prevention Research Center, which is headed up by my friend, Dr. John Lott. I don't get a dime for it. I do it because I love the organization. He is the author of many great books, including More Guns, Less Crime. But we want to talk about Hunter Biden and the fact that Hunter Biden has a major league problem with both cocaine, or did, and also had a problem with owning guns and having them tossed in trash cans only to be rescued by the Secret Service. And the fact that Joe Biden himself may find himself under investigation on a law that says you can't own a gun, you can't buy a gun if you're a user of illegal narcotics, which is a law that I'm sure Joe Biden would like to get rid of, except when it comes to his kit. Dr. Lott, welcome back.
It's great to talk to you. Thanks for having me on.
So as Politico put it, Hunter Biden could soon find himself in a surprising position at the cutting edge of a fight to strengthen the Second Amendment. How's this all going to come about? And why is it that Hunter Biden, the son of Joe Biden, has never been prosecuted for apparently illegally buying a gun, then having the gun thrown away by his now ex-wife, thrown in a trash can, and then the gun retrieved by the helpful Secret Service? Why is it that the kind of thing that usually gets people thrown in prison in this country, buying guns illegally when you're an illegal user of drugs, has not done that to Hunter Biden?
You know, this should be an incredibly easy case to go and prosecute. You have Hunter Biden's own words admitting that he was consuming illegal drugs. There's lots of other evidence there. The 4473 form that you have to fill out merely asks whether or not you've been using controlled substances that are banned. And, you know, obviously even with the laptop and other things, there's even more evidence beyond just other statements from President Biden himself that his son was using it, as well as Hunter. So it really shouldn't be a question up for debate. And it's an issue of perjury. You go and you sign the form, the 4473, under threat of perjury, that everything that you're putting down there is accurate. So if it were you or I doing that, and they had anywhere near the amount of evidence, we'd be prosecuted. What's happening right now, though, is this whole thing could be mute to some extent because the Biden Department of Justice seems to be slow walking this case. I mean, I was working in the Department of Justice up until January 2021. I think any other case, this would have been handled in a matter of literally just weeks to make a decision whether or not to challenge it. But here we're going on years. And in fact, they may be hitting the statute of limitations very soon, which simply these delays may protect Hunter Biden from being prosecuted. But if they do prosecute him, you can see that they realize that they have really no defense. And so what they're talking about is using the Bruin decision from last year, which struck down New York State's concealed carry laws. They had these so-called may issue type rules where you had to go and get permission from some local public official for arguing that you had a good reason for being able to go and protect yourself outside your home.
Right.
But the key thing there is in Justice Thomas's decision, they said there's a rule that you use to determine whether or not a gun control law is constitutional or not. And that is, you go look at the Second Amendment. If it's not clear from the Second Amendment whether it's constitutional or not, you go look at the debate. And if that's not clear, you go and look to see what rules were in effect, either in 1791 when the Second Amendment was adopted, or in 1868 when the 14th Amendment was enacted, which applied the Bill of Rights to the states. And the thing is, you didn't have background checks at either of those points in time. And so Hunter Biden apparently wants to argue, if in fact he gets charged, that background checks are unconstitutional. Now, I think he's going to have a hard time arguing that, because while you had 4 justices that were in sync with Justice Thomas on that, including Thomas, you didn't have 5 votes for that. You had 2 others, Kavanaugh and Roberts, who said that they thought that Thomas was correct in terms of laying out the arguments there, but they still listed several gun control laws that they said would still be constitutional, among them background checks. So anyway, just, if they win, there'd be no gun control laws that would really pass any standard at that point.
I guess what I don't understand is this, Dr. Lott. I've signed the 4473 form any number of times, and I'm aware every time I sign it, if I wrote down my birth date wrong or wrote down my Social Security number wrong, any of that, I'm aware that false swearing, which is the written version of perjury. So it's if you sign a document that says everything like your voter registration card, it better be the right information or you can go to prison for it. How is it that this case has been slow-walked for so long, even going back into President Trump's time, that the U.S. Justice Department just protects the Biden family? I understand why they wouldn't charge a sitting president with a crime. That's a policy, not a law, but it's one the DOJ sticks to, and I think it's probably not a bad idea. Otherwise, any president could be tied up in knots by all kinds of criminal charges while they're president. So they say, we'll wait till he's not. But a lot of this protected Hunter Biden before Joe Biden became president, didn't it?
Yeah. I mean, people can go and read the Laptop from Hell book, which goes through a lot of the, the emails and other things that Biden had, as well as many other times where it looks like the Department of Justice, the FBI, the Secret Service, went and protected him on a range of different issues, whether he had problems with prostitutes or cocaine or whatever. So, it's an amazing period of time where it looks like there's really major differences in law enforcement for whether or not you have the right name or not. People can go and read the Durham report and how the Hillary Clinton investigation was treated extremely differently than the Trump investigation. How when they had concerns, they went to Hillary Clinton and told her about the concerns that they had. But with Trump, their thing was to go and lie on court documents in order to try to spy on people on his campaign in order to get more information. It's kind of Watergate, magnified many, many times.
It's almost like the old Nixon, I think it was the Nixon quote where he said, if the president does it, it's legal. Well, now it sounds like Joe Biden could say, when I was vice president, whatever I did was legal. And while I wasn't vice president, before I became president, whatever I did was legal. And anybody associated with me, were their prosecution, because you can imagine what would have happened in Joe Biden's presidential campaign if his son was under indictment for gun crimes, even though I don't expect parents to take, to feel guilty about the actions of their kids unless they're aiding and abetting their kids. And in this case, it sounds like Joe Biden is going to protect his son. And we always expect parents to protect their kids. When you got a 50-year-old guy who's got an illegitimate child, a major league drug problem and then commits gun crimes. And Dad is one of the biggest anti-gunners in America by far, that somebody would call them out for the hypocrisy. That is Dr. John Lott. He heads the Crime Prevention Research Center, the author of More Guns, Less Crime. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. It's my favorite day of the week, First Amendment Friday. I'm going to let you get a chance to sound off in just a short while. But I got to tell you something. I mean, as a reporter, I've had the chance to do a lot of very interesting things. And I say thank God for all of that. And I do literally thank God for all of that. But I'll tell you, one of the singular experiences of my life was being invited 3 different times to be a guest and one time to be a speaker at what is known as the Marine Corps' birthday, November the 10th. Anywhere on planet Earth, you got a couple of Marines there. They're going to celebrate the Marine Corps' birthday. And that was really extraordinary. All 3 times it happened, different Marine Corps birthday celebrations. But the one that really stands out is the one where I met Chuck Mawhinney. Now, Chuck Mawhinney is the deadliest sniper in the United States Marine Corps. And I want to tell you that he kind of lived a somewhat anonymous life for a long, long time. And then a reporter, not me, but a reporter dug him up and went out to talk to him and said, I want to do a story about what you did. And so he talked to Chuck Mawhinney from the Marine Corps, retired Marine, deadliest sniper in Marine Corps history. And then he went and talked to Mawhinney's neighbors in Eastern Oregon. And a lot of his neighbors didn't even know Chuck Mawhinney had been in the military at all. He was that quiet and unassuming. Well, finally, Jim Lindsay has done the story that a lot of us have waited for, The Sniper, the untold story of the Marine Corps' greatest marksman of all time. Mr. Lindsay, I'm going to look forward to talking to, I think it was Sergeant Mawhinney, or was it Master Sergeant when he finally mustered out? Sergeant. So I'm going to talk to Sergeant Mawhinney another time, but I want you, because he is such a quiet and unassuming guy, I want you to tell me what you were seeking to do in writing The Sniper about Sergeant Chuck Mawhinney.
I met Chuck 30 years ago when my brother and I had a ranch in Eastern Oregon, and we hung around in the same little tavern after work occasionally. And he didn't tell me anything about ever being in the Marine Corps. He didn't even tell his wife. Nobody knew it, and we had a nice long visit, you do over beers like that, and then I moved back to west side of Oregon, and one evening I was watching TV, and there he was, and it was like a documentary of some sort, maybe the History Channel, and I thought, my gosh, there's Chuck. So at that time, I'd already written one book called The Little Bastards, so I contacted him through some friends, and I got to talking to him about why hasn't anybody ever written a book? And he said, well, 2 people tried and they both died before they got them done. Well, so we got together, and to answer your question, I wanted to write the book about the man, not about the gun or about the bullets. I wanted to write about how a person could grow up, where they grew up, what would make a person be able to do something like that. And Chuck agreed with me, and we decided to write the book. And so the book starts out as a 4-year-old child, and he had about his mentors, his early life, and then on into boot camp and so forth.
Just so people understand, and I'm glad I didn't mischaracterize how quiet and unassuming he is. In fact, at that Marine Corps birthday where I met Sergeant Mawhinney, I was meeting a lot of different Marines. They'd asked me to come and speak, and I'm standing there, and a gentleman walked up to me, and I looked at his patch. I wanted to address him correctly, and I said, Sergeant, and then I looked down at his name tab, and it said Mawhinney, and I said, are you? And he said, yes, I am. But he was that quiet about it. This is a man who joined the Marines at age 18, 1967, and during 16 months in Vietnam, 103 confirmed kills in 16 months, and still holds the record as the deadliest U.S. Marine in American history. That is extraordinary, but for him to come back and have not even his wife or his neighbors know that he had served in the military just says an awful lot about the man. So in a few minutes that we've got, Jim, tell me what you managed to learn about this man and what made him such an extraordinary marksman and such a great member of the U.S. Marine Corps, as well as being kind of quiet and unassuming after the fact.
I think, I think it just started when his upbringing. He had, he spent a lot of time with his grandpa. They had an outdoor toilet, and they're down there in Lakeview, and his grandpa would take him around town, and he would visit with and listened as older men talked about things. And then he got in a little trouble, and he was quite a character in high school, and had an awful lot of fun. There was a little bit of beer involved and some fast cars. So he was actually in city jail when he decided I better change and I better go into service. His dad was a city cop, and it was pretty embarrassing. But so he was just in for the weekend. But so he joined the Marine Corps, and he lived in. He grew up in 5,000 feet elevation, the town of Lakeview. He got down to San Diego in boot camp. He told me, I've never knew what breathing air was like. And he said, I took off running, and everybody would just follow me wherever we went. So he excelled. And then, of course, he was a kid that hunted a lot, always got a deer and that sort of thing. So when they found out pretty fast that he was awfully good with a gun, and all the training they do in boot camp and afterwards, he was just always number one. And then he wanted to go into aviation, and he missed the test. He would have had to wait another 30 days washing dishes down there, and so he decided this sniper school opened up, and so he volunteered for that, and with his record he was able to get in. And the thing with sniper school, one of the things that they teach is you have to know where you're at all times. Yep. And so you're out there in a pitch dark and no flashlight, and I don't even know how they do it, but he excelled in that too. And so he went to Vietnam expecting to be a sniper, and then he had to be a grunt for a while. But he eventually got into the sniper platoon in An Hoa, which is 20 miles west of Da Nang. And he went through the first 13 months, and then he came back and we did another 2 or 5 months. And you're right, 16. Got 103 confirmed kills, but he also got 216 non-confirmed. He's very, very famous for the 16 that he shot NVA soldiers coming across the river at night. Well, all the bodies floated down the river, so he never got credit for them. But his spotters was there, so they were non-confirmed kills.
Well, you can read the entire story. It is told by Jim Lindsay. The second book, it's called The Sniper, the untold story of the Marine Corps' greatest marksman of all time. Jim, thank you very much. Congratulations on putting this book together, and especially because it involves Sergeant Mahoney. I tell you what, I look forward to reading it, and I look forward to talking to Sergeant Mahoney again, this time on the radio instead of in person at a Marine Corps birthday. Back in just a moment, we'll get to your phone calls and your emails at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. I'm glad to be with you, and I'm glad to take your phone calls. And in case you haven't guessed it, I have had it up to here with drag queen shows, especially drag queen shows aimed at children. That one they've gone beyond the pale. Let me give you the latest example, and then I'll get to your phone calls at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. If you happen to be a naysayer, somebody who disagrees with my point of view, we love naysayers on this program. So naysayers go to the head of the line at 866-439-5277. You can send emails to talk@larslarson.com. And if you want to, vote in our Twitter poll. Doesn't cost anything, might be habit forming. Vote only once. We vote Republican style, not Democrat style. You can't vote more than once. Just go to @LarsLarsonShow or at larslarson.com. Glad to have you with me. And a big welcome to our newest talk affiliate, KIDO Talk Radio at 107.5 FM and 580 AM in Boise, Idaho, the home of Kevin Miller. Thank you very much for joining us. That's KIDO Talk Radio, joining our Lars affiliates around America. But let me talk about these kids who are being allowed to go to drag queen shows. Not just being allowed to, but what has happened. is that drag queen shows are now being pushed into every corner of society. And since it's summertime, there are going to be parades in various places, and the drag queens are part of it, even at the so-called family-friendly events. Well, guess who's had enough of it? The Tennessee General Assembly passed a law just a few months ago that criminalizes what they call adult cabaret entertainment from taking place in public or in the presence of minors. Now, I think that's incredibly sensible. What's happened is that there's a theater that's based in Memphis, Tennessee. Our friends who listen to Todd Starnes' show in Memphis are going to recognize it. It's called Friends of George, which is an LGBTQ plus theater group. They sued over this law, and they claimed that it violates their First Amendment rights. Apparently, the First Amendment gives you not just the right to express yourself or to engage in speech or dance or any of that, but apparently they believe that it actually gives you the right to do that in front of children. Well, a federal judge has ruled that a first-in-the-nation Tennessee law that ought to be copied by every one of the 50 states, 58 if you're an Obama fan, that limits drag shows in public or in places where children could be present is unconstitutional. They actually shot it down. The decision came down late on Friday. U.S. District Judge Thomas Parker, appointed by President Trump, wrote that the law was unconstitutionally vague and substantially overbroad, and that it infringes on the First Amendment rights of drag performers. So I'd put the question to you this way. You have a right to do and say things. Now, you can't do things that are threatening, like shouting fire in a crowded theater, that sort of thing, staging a fake terrorist attack, or sending somebody white powder in an envelope. All of those are sensible limitations on the First Amendment. And anybody who tells me that, well, the First Amendment has no limits, it's absolute. No, it's not. All of the 10 amendments, in fact, all constitutional amendments, are subject to time, place, and manner restrictions. We've talked about this on the program before. It means that you have to have some limits on First Amendment free speech, but the limits have to be narrowly tailored. The problem is the assault on kids in this country is so broad that over the last several years, and it has been going on a lot in recent years, you've seen drag queen story hour at public libraries, and then drag queen story hour and other drag queen events brought into high schools, middle schools, elementary schools. We even talked about the fact that the Pentagon was allowing drag queen shows at Nellis Air Force Base outside of Las Vegas. Finally, the Pentagon shut that down, but the military these days has apparently gone woke under the Joe Biden administration, and now even the effort of a state to try to make sure that children are protected has been ruled to be unconstitutional. I think that's dead wrong. Let me grab this call from Darren. Darren in Michigan. How are you, sir?
Hey, Lars. Very nice to speak with you again.
Thanks for listening on WILS.
You got her, sir. This ordeal with the, contractor mail guy going from Bethpage, New York, in Long Island, I'm not sure how far.
He went to Pennsylvania. He went, which is not that far away. But Darren, just so people understand what we're talking about, there was a man, we talked to him on the show a couple of years ago. He's apparently kind of gone into hiding now. He drove as a contract driver for an outfit that hauls mail for the U.S. Postal Service. And he told his story on this show a couple of years ago, right before the 2020 election. He was told to pick up a whole bunch of already completed ballots and haul them off to Pennsylvania. And then he went through a weird set of circumstances where he tried to deliver the load. They said, no, you're going to have to deliver it tomorrow. And then he comes back to find that one of the trailers on his truck had just disappeared. And the Office of the Inspector General of the Postal Service did an investigation. And it seems that the story he told, as crazy as it sounded, was actually legitimate. So what do you want to say about it? I just want to bring the rest of the folks into the conversation.
No, that's good. Clarity is essential. My question is, why was one ballot, a Pennsylvania vote, so to speak, sent to New York, let alone 200 and some thousand? I mean, that right there, and nobody said, nothing to see here, or that's all they said.
Well, I could tell you why, Darren. If you were going to create a bunch of fake ballots, would it make sense to create them where you're going to use them or create them somewhere else out of view?
No, I understand the theory, and I'm on your side about the anomalies of the election. But it's like, no, wait a minute, why do we have postmarks or whatever from another state for our election, whether it's 10 miles away, state line, or across the country? So
it doesn't. None of this stuff makes sense, Darren. In the same way that in November of 2020, when they told all the election workers who were counting ballots at the Staples Center, we're going to shut down counting for the night, and they used the excuse of a broken water main that turned out not to be broken at all. It was a leaking men's toilet in one of the urinals inside the Staples Center. And you said, why did you shut this down? Well, we had a massive water leak. No, you didn't. And we shut down counting. And then we all saw the security tapes of them taking suitcases full of ballots out from under tables. None of those questions have been adequately answered at this point, Darren. I think what we're left to conclude is that there was cheating in 2020. There was probably less of it in 2022 because a lot of states saw what happened in 2020 and they changed the laws to try to shut down some of that cheating. And should we anticipate there will be attempts by the Democrats to cheat next fall? I could just about guarantee it. Darren, thanks for the call. Thanks for listening on WILS. Back in just a moment. Glad to get your calls. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm always glad to take your phone calls and emails. Yesterday, I told you how UC Berkeley Law is going to make the new head of criminal law at UC Berkeley, Chesa Boudin, the son of terrorists, and I kid you not, the former DA of San Francisco, recalled by the voters. They're going to make him head of criminal law. Now, that might make you wonder, what exactly are they teaching in law schools today? Well, Hans von Spakowski, who's a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation, has some other good examples of how law schools seem to be abandoning the teaching of actual laws and the Constitution in America in favor of pushing political ideologies like critical race theory. Hans, welcome back.
Lars, thanks for having me back.
So I was kind of stunned when I saw that about Chesa Boudin, although I was reasonably sure that when he got it booted by the voters, that somebody would provide him with some kind of sinecure so that he could actually make a paycheck somewhere, even though the voters themselves said, we don't want this guy anymore. And that was even the liberal voters of San Francisco. What's going on at the rest of America's law schools, and why are they pushing CRT instead of actually teaching the law and teaching the Constitution?
Well, in fact, Christian Adams and I are doing a series on the top 10 law schools. So these are the top 10 schools in the country as rated by U.S. News and World Report. And they are no longer schools where they're trying to teach students to be ethical, professional lawyers who can represent any client effectively in court. When you look at the coursework, the curriculums, what you find is that they have turned into revolutionary, progressive re-education camps. And the courses are intended to teach these students how to basically collapse the American legal system, which they say is unfair, systematically racist, and oppressive, and to reconstruct it in their view of what they think a socialist utopia should be. And if people think I'm exaggerating,
it's a very broad chart. It's a very broad indictment you brought, Hans. So you're going to have to support it. Back that one up.
Well, all you have to do is look at our series of articles. So far, we've done five of the law schools, and we go through and take the actual description of the classes and what they're teaching, and you just wouldn't believe it. I mean, for example, at the Columbia Law School, they have this course called Breakthrough in Abolition. Now, most people thought abolition occurred right in 1865 when we won the Civil War and got rid of slavery. No, what they're talking about is that all of our prisons are simply the result of systematic racism, and they should all be closed.
So we're going to cut loose all the convicted criminals on the
Yes.
streets, or we're not going to send people to prison anymore for horrible crimes like rape and robbery and murder?
Yeah, and the basic theory behind these courses, and there are many of these courses throughout these law schools, is that we needed to fund the police and we need to close our prisons, because really all the criminals in our prisons are victims of a biased, racist system if they're not also political prisoners. Or take another one at Columbia called Gender Justice.
Oh my
or
God.
Another one, Sexuality and Gender Law Practicum, that studies sexual difference, gender-based stereotypes, sexuality orientation, gender identity, and the meaning of equality in a range of contexts. All of these teaching that, again, we are an oppressive society for all women, and therefore we've got to make changes. Christian found a course, if you'll believe this, at Harvard, the purpose of which is to teach us how to look at baboons as a way of getting rid of male violence and male predominance in society, because apparently the way baboons act is something we should all be copying, or I guess I could say aping.
Aping. So they
That's
literally say
that's a real class.
If men would actually behave more like apes do in ape culture, that somehow we'd be a better society?
Yes, that is exactly what it says. This course is called the Bonobo Sisterhood Revolution Through Female Alliances, and it talks about how feminist governance will make a huge change, and we need to look at the way these basically monkeys and stuff run their societies, because they offer humans the ability to see how to create a society free of male sexual coercion.
What is that? I mean, how do they define male sexual coercion? Is there a definition?
That permeates our society, and according to them, that permeates everything we do. And critical race theory is everywhere within these schools. The University of Chicago, for example, has all kinds of courses on this too. And I think if people actually look at these courses, they would think that it must be a story actually in the Babylon
Bee. Yeah. Well,
yeah,
let me
because
ask you,
they just right.
But Hans, what happens then when these lawyers, they graduate law school, they take the bar, they go out and they drop a shingle, or they go to work in a big law firm? What's going to happen when one of these evil white people, who are predominant in the United States, we're still the majority, when they walk in and say, "Hey, I need some help," what kind of reception are they likely to get from one of these little indoctrinated acolytes of these law schools?
Well, they aren't going to get good legal help, because they're not going to get the kind of competent, ethical, professional help they should be getting from the kids who have been basically trained to be social justice warriors. That is what is going on at these law schools. Listen, this is so bad. That is why you are seeing conservative speakers being shouted down, intimidated, harassed at these law schools, or as you know, at Stanford just not too long ago, a federal appeals court judge was shouted down, not allowed to speak, vile, insulting remarks were thrown at him, and that has led to the Montana AG. He's the first AG in the country. The Montana Attorney General just sent a letter to the state Supreme Court in Montana saying that students who act in this manner and who are using uncivil threats to silence and ostracise people they disagree with that should be taken into consideration when they're applying for a bar license in Montana, and they shouldn't be admitted. And I think he's exactly right about that.
I think he's right, too, because most states have a moral turpitude clause that will say if you've engaged in acts of moral turpitude, we don't want to license you to our bar. Hans, we're going to encourage people to take a look at the study that you and Christian have put together. That's Hans von Spakowski, a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Are you a small business owner who could use a few $100,000 and who couldn't? Employee retention tax credits are an incredible opportunity. Call the experts at Get My Funds. They've been around since the beginning of the pandemic. They've already helped out 1,500 small business owners, and they got $300 million in funding. And believe me, Get My Funds knows what they're doing. They have a team of CPAs who specialize in filing for these tax credits. They're with you every step of the way, even if there's an audit. If you retain 5 or more W-2 employees during COVID, even if you already got the PPP money, you need to call Get My Funds now. 800-535-2950. It's not a grant. It's not a loan. It's a tax refund. And there are no upfront fees to find out if you qualify. Go with the team you can trust at GetMyFunds.com. 800-535-2950 or getmyfunds.com. That's getmyfunds.com. And you're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you. And if you ask me today, I'd tell you that I don't have nearly the trust in America's healthcare system. It's doctors, it's nurses, the insurance folks, and of course, the big arm of the federal government and the state government, because I saw what happened during the pandemic. And I saw the way that our freedoms were abused, and I saw that the medical establishment really didn't care. And didn't care that they were abusing our freedoms. I didn't mean they didn't seem thoughtful and polite and all that, although there have been times when even thoughtfulness and politeness kind of went out the window. It's sort of like, you've already paid us for your health care. You've already paid thousands and thousands of dollars for health insurance premiums. We've already got your money. Why should we give a damn whether you're satisfied with the way that you're being treated or not? That's my attitude today. And I suspect it may be the attitude of my friend Wesley Smith, who's an author and senior fellow at the Discovery Institute Center on Human Exceptionalism. Wes, welcome back to the program.
Lars, thanks for having me back. Good to talk to you.
So it's good to talk to you as well, sir, but tell me this. I mean, I sense in an awful lot of people, I would even say the majority of people, not even people like me politically, that they don't trust the healthcare system writ whole or writ large as much as they did just a couple of years ago. Do you think that's true nationwide?
I certainly do think that's true. I think that the way the COVID emergency was handled crushed that trust. You know, I've been asked on several occasions, well, why did we trust, the polio vaccine as opposed to what we now see? And the difference is that Salk and Sabin weren't trying to change the world. They weren't trying to suppress opinions that might disagree with theirs. They were just trying to bring forward a polio vaccine, and they succeeded.
Right.
But now we find a hyper-politicized environment in which, as you know, the very method of science during COVID, and I would also say on this transgender issue for children, is being crushed by suppressing dissent, stifling debate, preventing heterodox views from being presented openly and publicly, even sometimes punishing it. And that leads, you can't, force trust. You can't coerce trust. It has to be earned. And right now, that trust has been lost.
Well, and as one example, if you say, well, American institutions, how about the CDC? I've seen polls that say trust in the CDC, which was about 2/3, 66% before the pandemic, is now at least 1/3 lower, down to 44%. Less than half the people in this country trust the CDC. And when it comes to the WHO, I think it's even lower, because the WHO actively lied to Americans and to the rest of the world about what was going on. And as you say, some of them seem to have allied themselves with people like the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab and others, saying, we're not just going to address a single health emergency. We want to fix the world, and we're going to tell you how you're going to do it. You're going to have a vaccine passport imposed upon you. We're going to have institutions outside the United States like the WHO that Joe Biden wants to give permission to call all the shots on any future health emergency. And people always assume that's disease. I said, no, they can define guns as a health emergency. They could define social media as a health emergency. They could define information as a health emergency.
Global warming.
Global warming could be defined. And all of them, and you say, and we're supposed to trust people that we never elected, aren't from the United States, aren't in the United States, and they get to call all the shots? I wouldn't trust that system either.
And the treaty that's being negotiated, I've written about it at National Review with the NHL, and the Biden administration supports this, actually would allow the suppression of information, the kind of thing we saw during COVID, the kind of thing we're now seeing with regard to treating children with gender dysphoria, the kind of suppression and working with social media companies and so forth to prevent true discourse from occurring. You cannot have good science without good discourse, and that is one of the things that is really becoming an endangered species.
And you think that one of the fixes to this is, and I've said it for a long time, I forget who said it originally, sunlight is the best disinfectant, meaning put it out in front of everybody, put all the facts out there, and if there's bad information or bad advice, it'll be found out if it's transparent. And yet this system seems to be aimed at going the opposite direction. Hide the information except what our government masters decide we're entitled to hear or see.
And that's why I'm such a supporter of the work of Jay Bhattacharya. You may recall he's one of the co-authors of the Great Barrington Declaration. And the Great Barrington Declaration actually proved to be more right than what the government's policies were. For example, decrying the shutting down of schools because it would cause so much harm to children. And the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration were right. Yet Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins of the NIH, in fact, an email from Collins to Fauci said, we must stop these fringe doctors. Well, Bhattacharya had more than 130 peer-reviewed epidemiological articles published. He was no fringe doctor. His co-authors were from Harvard and from Oxford. They were not fringe. So what was really going on was Fauci and Collins seeking to stifle opinions other than their own. And now Bhattacharya is back with a new idea. It's called the Norfolk Group. He's part of it. And what he is saying is we need to have a COVID Truth Commission. We need to have the government form a commission with subpoena power that could answer very important questions that people have, because until these answers are brought forth, until the actual, what was done right, what was done wrong, and where we went astray in terms of discourse is brought forth and clearly identified, we will never restore that trust. And I think he's absolutely right. And I've also called for a similar kind of body, perhaps not with subpoena power, but we need to have a real open discussion about this gender-affirming care stuff, because right now Europe, Western Europe, France, Norway, UK, Finland are saying no to this, and then the administration and American medical institutions are saying if you say no, you're a science denier. Well, both can't be true, and both, of course, aren't true, because saying that there's a difference of opinion and looking at the data and analyzing it in a way that perhaps the establishment doesn't like isn't science denying, it's science.
I'm talking to Wesley Smith, who's an author and senior fellow at the Discovery Institute Center on Human Exceptionalism. And the key question, when the WHO wants to drive this whole process and say, put us in charge, if we say there's an emergency, you, the U.S., will actually jump and do whatever we tell you to do. Now, you called it a treaty, Wes. The only thing I'd ask about is, as I understand it, Joe Biden doesn't plan to put this forward as a treaty that is subject to, confirmation or ratification by the U.S. Senate. He says he's just going to cut a deal without involving the people's representatives. Is that still the case?
Well, that's what the plan is, because it is a treaty, but they have a sneaky, as I recall, aspect to it that says that before it's ratified, a country can sign up and be bound by it.
That's Wesley Smith from the Discovery Institute Center on Human Exceptionalism. What if you could help turn back the clock and help your dog play like a puppy again, no matter their age? It's Lars, and it sure works for Sir Winston Churchill, my Bernese Mountain Dog. That's why Dr. Marty developed Nature's Blend, because your dog needs a diet full of real cuts of meat, similar to what they'd eat in the wild. Dogs go bonkers for Nature's Blend. When given the choice between Nature's Blend and the giant online retailers America's #1 bestseller in dry dog food. A study shows 29 out of 30 dogs choose Nature's Blend first. Tori from Tulsa says, my fur baby is so eager to eat it. Other dog foods I've tried gave my sweet boy issues with allergies. They all went away with Dr. Marty's and Nature's Blend. Give your dog a food they'll love and help support their youthful energy, healthy skin, easy digestion, and a happy full life. For a limited time, claim 54% off Nature's Blend and get a free pack of premium dog treats from Dr. Marty Pets. Go to drmartypets.com/pets or text PETS to 511-511. That's text PETS to 511-511. Study available on request, message, and data rates apply. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I want to tell you about a very weird survey that says a tremendously large percentage of young people in America say they would be okay with the idea of putting surveillance cameras inside your home by the government, that they actually are warming up to that idea. Let me get to that in a moment. Let me go first to Patrick. Hey, Patrick, welcome to the Lars Larson Show. What's on your mind?
Hey, calling from Albany, New York. That guy you had on earlier with the law schools and the curriculum that they're teaching now, and I was wondering if down the road they're going to change the bar exam to reflect the curriculum that these folks are learning in the schools.
I would put money on that bet, Patrick. If you say in the bar exam, I've never taken the bar exam, but if you, because I've never gone to law school, but if you said, are we going to have questions about racial justice, about critical race theory, about white supremacy, I could just about guarantee, especially if you happen to be, you live in a very liberal state, New York State, very blue, very Democrat dominated. Do I think they would change the exams so they can start filtering out anybody with a conservative point of view? I'd bet on it. Would you?
Yeah, and Albany Law School is here. I live a little bit north, but Albany Law School is here, and then we listened to that graduation speech from that girl a week or so ago, and it was very liberal, very anti-America, very anti all of that, and I'm just concerned that God forbid I need a criminal lawyer.
Yep.
Right. That they're not going to be able to when I go into court with them, they're not going to be able to give me a good defense.
Yep.
Because I'm a middle-aged white man, right? And if all their training is against the so-called patriarchy, right, against me, then they're not going to give me a reasonable defense.
Yeah,
right.
Well, I'll tell you what. You know what I'd worry about more than the criminal side, Patrick? Consider this scenario. Let's say you own a little rental house, and let's say you rent it to a tenant, and then you and the tenant get into a dispute, and you decide to evict that tenant. And you say, look, you haven't paid the rent, you've damaged the property, I'm going to evict you. And let's say your tenant is a person of color. So you go to one of these CRT special lawyers who's graduated from the modern law school, and you walk in and you say, well, I own this piece of property, and I rent to this man, and he won't pay the rent, and I tried to kick him out, and now he's suing me. And what do you suppose your politically correct new lawyer is going to say to you? And he's going to say to you, well, I graduated from law school. I got all the lessons about white privilege, about CRT, about DEI and everything else. You're a white guy, and you own this house that this man lives in, and you're just a prime example of white supremacy. You have all the advantages, and he may not know that you worked your tail off to save up the down payment to buy a house, or maybe it was your first house, and when you got a little more money, you said, well, I'm going to rent this house and I'll buy my house, and you're dependent on that money. Maybe you're planning on it being your retirement, some of your retirement income, and you're trying to tell this politically correct diversity, equity, and inclusion lawyer how you should kick this person of color out of the house. What do you suppose he's going to tell you?
He's going to tell me to let that person stay. And It doesn't even have to be a person of color or a minority. Even if it's a white person who's a tenant, right?
But he's not as affluent as you are.
Right, and they're going to say that I have the privilege and I should buckle, just, let this person do as they please on my property. And like you said, if I'm dependent on, and most landlords are dependent on that income, that's why they have it. It's a business for them. Then I'm losing, I'm losing all the way around.
Absolutely right. And then imagine yourself as an employer or in any other place where you need a lawyer, and the lawyers are all being told, oh, these white guys, yeah, they're evil anyway. America's an evil place, and they're the epitome of evil. Patrick, thank you very much. I appreciate the call. I want to tell you about this survey, though. This is really disturbing. The Cato Institute went out and they did a survey, and what they were trying to find out is what people thought about what I would consider kind of a crazy idea. Do you favor or oppose the government installing surveillance cameras, not in public, but in every household to reduce domestic violence, abuse, and other illegal activity? Now, most Americans, only about 14% of all Americans support that crazy idea. In fact, I think it's extraordinary that even 14% of Americans support the idea of putting surveillance cameras not on street corners in the public areas of a city where the police are trying to monitor for activity in public. This is the idea of putting cameras into every single household, kind of like George Orwell depicted in 1984 with Big Brother, who could keep an eye on you at all times. 75% said they would oppose government surveillance cameras in homes. 68% said they would strongly oppose it. And then kind of strangely, 10% said they had no opinion either way. But here's where it gets weird. Americans, according to the Cato Institute survey, under the age of 30, 3 in 10 of them, 29% of them, said they were in favor. Under 30 said they favored the government installing surveillance cameras in every single household to reduce domestic violence, abuse, etc. The support declines with age, dropping to only 20% among 30 to 44-year-olds. But ask yourself this, how many people you know would you say, hey, do you have cameras at your house? And many of them, because cameras are very cheap these days, you can get one for $40 or $50. It hooks up to the internet. You can keep an eye on your backyard or your front yard, or if you've got dogs or other animals, you can keep an eye on them. But it's absolutely extraordinary to me that 29% of these under 30 people said, oh no, have the government put a camera inside of every single household in America. And what Cato points out is that there's a reason to believe this is generational. They say Americans over the age of 45 have vastly different attitudes about in-home surveillance cameras. Even the people I know who've put a camera or two on the outside of their house, and many of them actually help the police catch criminals. And the police say to you, do you think you've got some video of that? And you say, yeah, I want to catch that. I want that guy caught and prosecuted, even though it wasn't your package that got stolen. You care about the people in your neighborhood. But most people, if you ask them, do you put cameras inside your home, say in your living room or your dining room or your kitchen or your bathroom, you'd say, of course not. I care about my privacy. Apparently, according to the Cato Institute survey, young Americans, they appear to be warming up to the idea. 866-439-5277. Naysayers go to the head of the line, and you're listening to The Lars Larson Show.